Tess! Stop bloody bouncing your sister into the coral tree! Bloody caviar. Sorry.
Help?
What were you saying?
I was just talking about flying.
Oh, right. Why?
Oh, I don't know. I just think it might be really interesting to see the world from that angle.
Wait, are you saying you want to fly?
Well, maybe?
But you're an egg.
Yeah, I know, but I could wear a helmet or something.
Oi, Tess! Stop putting the bloody decorative pebbles up your nostrils! Look, Daz, I just don't think eggs are meant to fly, mate. Ow! Tess, what did I just say?
Oopsie.
Flight simulator, where you can fly anywhere you can dream of, as long as you are not an egg. Please verify that you are not an egg.
Melanie, do you reckon I can have a go at flying your kite?
I don't know, Daryl. Isn't it illegal for eggs to fly or something?
Well, yeah, maybe. I don't know, but I wouldn't actually be flying myself. I would just be, holding your
Oi,
kite,
babes.
which is...
Is this egg bothering you? Because I'll end him if he is.
No, sorry, I was just...
Oh my god, that's like so romantic.
Melanie, your kite.
Oh, wow.
All right, Humpty Dumpty. Do you know why you're here?
I tried to fly.
You try to fly. And do you know what happens when eggs try to fly?
They have fun.
This is the third time this year you've tried something like this. What's going on, Daryl? Look, you're a good guy, Daryl. I'm gonna let you off with a warning. But this is the last time, okay? You should really get some help, mate.
Egg. A vessel for housing tiny embryonic life forms that have evolved over millions of years to live in complete symbiotic harmony with one another. But can eggs fly? Yes, I think they can.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Inside Unreal, a weekly show where we learn, explore, and celebrate everything Unreal. I am your host, Tina, and today with me, I have some of the incredible, wonderful members of our documentation team. They do so much, and we're going to cover just a small portion of it today, but I just wanted to take a second to basically fangirl over the three of you because you're wonderful and the stuff that you do is incredible, and we literally wouldn't be able to do what we do without you. So round of applause, everybody in chat, for documentation team here. But let's get in to learn a little bit more about our guests individually, shall we? So first off, Kat, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, yeah, my name is Kat. I'm coming to you from the void that is Scandinavia, so it's completely dark around me. I am one of the managers in the documentation team for Unreal, and I've worked in the tech industry at large for 12 years, both as like a general communicator and then as a translator, and then since as a technical writer and now a manager of technical writers. I am a linguist by credential, that's my background, and I really like polka dots.
Yes, as do I. we have the similarity here. We have a groundwork to go from. Next, Jessica, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Jessica. I've been doing this at Epic for 4 years as a technical writer. Previous to that, I was an author and I was an educator for 15 years. I taught high school kids how to do Unreal since Unreal Engine 2. I've been covering PCG world building tools and the art pipeline for a while now. Outside of that, I love to do level design. If you follow me on Twitter, you've seen some of my level design tutorials, and I actually was part of the UEFN level design AMA recently. Other than that, I love to cook. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll see a ton of my food. That's a good thing. And I suppose I also love polka dots.
Oh my god. Okay, Mike, you have to say that you love polka dots now because it's just part of peer pressure at this point.
Well, I hate to disappoint Tina, but I am a zigzag line person. I always have been.
Cancel the show. Cut it out. Can't do it anymore.
So I'm Mike Prinke. I am a technical writer on the Unreal Engine documentation team. I've been working here for the last 4-ish years, a little bit longer than 4 years. For the last 12 in total, I've been working in video games. I've worked on mainly small and mid-sized productions throughout my career before coming to Epic as a user interface and gameplay programmer, and I've also done some tools programming. The areas of documentation that I cover are platforms, so how to get your game onto a given device, user interface, so everything having to do with Slate and UMG, and a little bit of a section that we call Foundation, which is things that are fairly integral to the engine, like asset management and debugging tools, profiling, that kind of thing. So I cover lots and lots of things that you probably don't think about very often, but you're going to need to get to know very soon if you start a game project.
I feel like those are arguably also some of the most important parts too. The stuff that you don't think about until it's too late, and now you have to think about it, and you have no idea what any of it is. Awesome. Well, also, we have actually had both Mike and Jessica on the show previously for different shows, different purposes, but they are not newcomers to the show here. I'll see if I can grab the links to their previous talks. They were really, really good. Mike also did a UI show with us, so if you're interested in learning some more stuff, I'll make sure I grab the link for that, and you can check it out. Some good stuff. And then Kat's the only newcomer. But not a newcomer.
So no pressure putting me here with like actual superstars that the community knows and so on. Like,
You're also a superstar. Believe it.
Anyone who's followed me on Twitter, whenever I brag about my lead, Kat is my lead.
Yeah, I'm the person who constantly tells Jessica to take time off because she overworks herself.
So, Kat, the lead, otherwise known as.
Yep.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about technical writing, what technical writers are, what they do, just kind of a general sense of what we're going to be covering, basically.
Okay, I can do that. Before I dig into that, I want to preface though, it should be self-evident because this is called Inside Unreal. But at Epic, we have like a consolidated documentation team that actually covers various different products of Epic. So we have Unreal Engine, of course, but we also have UE for Fortnite, we have Fortnite Creative, we have Verse, and then we also have a team that covers developer services and compliance. So the reason I'm saying that is twofold. One is to kind of illustrate the breadth of what we're actually doing as technical writers, and also to kind of do a little disclaimer that the examples that we're specifically going to be giving are specific only to Unreal Engine. So we have like shared workflows that covers about 80% of what we're all doing. So the technicalities or like the broad strokes of what technical writing is kind of covers all of these various different sub-teams. But each one has like a different cadence, there are different needs, there are different releases and so on and requirements. So there's about like a 20% like different tool stacks and so on for each of them. So I just wanted like to preface this because I here don't speak on behalf of like Fortnite Creative, for example. I can speak on behalf of technical writers in general. So I just wanted to do that little preface and like with that lead into what even does a technical writer do? Well, we're the ones that write the documentation. That's the long and short of it. Yep, simple. Live stream done. Bye.
There we go. Thanks for joining, everybody.
Yeah. No, but I, you know, when you asked me like what even is a technical writer, I did a little kind of talking points to myself, and I wanted to kind of touch upon the aspect of technical, right? One of the worst things you can do to a technical writer is call us a content writer because like our face will scream at you. But yeah, we are called technical writers because we have technical knowledge and we write about technical products. As I said before, I've worked in the tech industry at large. I have a hard time consolidating with the fact that I work in gaming because I consider myself an industry technical writer. Before coming here, I documented something as delightful and interesting as an email marketing software as part of a content management system. That was not as interesting as Unreal Engine, but just to say that like technical writers are universal to the tech industry. Before working there, I've also worked at Unity where I documented the universal render pipeline, if anyone has used that, but you know, let's not shine a light on it too much because we're doing Unreal and it's better. But yeah, so technical writers are the people that have to understand both the technical aspects of the product and also understand the need of the users that need to have information given to them at any given point at the level that they need it. So documentation means various different things, and the same person might have different needs throughout their journey of creating a game or creating anything with the engine. So we're in charge of both providing conceptual information, what even is the thing. We're in charge of providing instructions of how do you achieve your goal with it. And we're also in charge of providing the reference material of like, what even does the button do? So that's the long and short of it.
So no big deal, basically. Just
no pressure.
The foundation for being able to do anything and everything in the engine.
It's a completely chill job with no caveats.
It's very low level, low risk at all times. I can tell.
And everyone loves us for what we do.
Well, there have been, I do want to take a second to also call out that there's been a lot of updates to the documentation just in general recently. So if you haven't gone around and just looked around, basically a lot of the articles have been updated or just new. There's so much to learn. It's wild that this is what you all do, is just take all this. It's a huge amount of information and you're able to condense it down into what matters most, where to actually start, what bits and pieces actually apply to a given circumstance. and then format that in a way that's bite-sized, easy for somebody to actually comprehend and then apply to their own projects. That's a difficult ask for anyone.
All the parts you just listed are the fun part.
Yes.
The part where you find out the information is that's a whole other, iceberg kind of situation.
Yes. And also adding to that, like something that a lot of people don't realize is part of being a technical writer is that we work like in setups that are really similar to what developers do. We have our source file in a repository. We have to constantly be on guard for like the architectural structure of what we're doing. We merge stuff. We do constant like diff analyses and so on. And we have to like do upkeep, and also the word regression. Whenever I say regression, when I'm talking to stakeholders, the QA people always like do a little twitch. But because we're working with versioned products, which we'll get into an example of later, we have to constantly be the people that kind of go, if there's a new change in a feature, we're the ones that have to go and go, what's the difference between the other thing? But also, this thing kind of connects to this thing. So you're kind of giving me only the granular information about this specific thing that you developed, but I happen to know that it also touches these other aspects. So not only do we have to have deep knowledge about the things that we're writing about, like I've been writing about virtual production for my first time here, or for my first while that I was here, but I also have to know like that these elements touch upon so many other things. So like I have to like have like a knowledge of like, oh, this thing actually relates to the scene camera, and this thing over here actually relates to like setting up your pipeline, which is actually Mike's area. So like here is a thing where Mike and I have to collaborate and so on. So we have to have not only extensive knowledge about how to write those specific things that you're saying, like the big ask of knowing what information to give to who, when, and how. We also have to have knowledge about the area that we are documenting, but we also have to have like a cross-team, cross-product knowledge so that we can collaborate and kind of achieve the best holistic overview. So again, no pressure.
No thing. Yeah. So just being able to have all of that information, you're wizards, basically, now that I think about it.
Yeah, the thing I usually call us is like we're magical unicorns that are precious and need to be celebrated at all times.
It's a little bit longer than wizards, so I feel like we might have to condense it for like, the title that sits on the desk, but I don't know. If we could get an acronym, we could figure something out.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I do want to make sure that we also have time to dig into some of the more specific examples that y'all have brought for us today. So to kick that off, I think, Jessica, you were gonna get us started, right?
Yeah. I wanted to bring in front of everyone today the PCG sections of the documentation. PCG stands for Procedural Content Generation. It is brand new as of 5.2. and is actually still considered experimental. And where this kind of differs from our normal documentation process of learning about the thing and writing about the thing is normally we really don't try to document experimental things. When we're working with it, it's hard to keep up with something that is changing every day. And when I say it changes every day, I do mean it changes every day. Part of working on documentation for any feature here at Epic is a lot of working with the folks on the dev team. And, I have regular meetings with all of my dev teams, but with the PCG team in particular, I need to keep up with them every day to make sure that when they make a change, I need to know when it's coming out and will be available to the public, and how does that affect the documentation. So we ended up documenting PCG because it was a huge marketing feature. If everyone remembers, it was a big part of last year's GDC presentation, the Rivian demo, if you remember that. That's what that picture on the page that's being shown is. So it really needed to have documentation that was ready for GDC last year. And as we sort of have moved on to 5.3, 5.4, development has continued on PCG, and anyone who's used it knows that it does some incredible things. You want to create a forest biome, you can do it. You want to create an underwater coral reef, you can do it. You want to create a house that generates itself, or even levels that generate themselves. You can do it with PCG. But the documentation doesn't really reflect that. It's because it's brand new, and as we go, it's constantly changing. I always try to get a base level of documentation, a foundational level of documentation for new features like this. Things like an overview, which we have. We can throw that up on the big screen, as well as a quick start, which isn't there yet. I'm working on it. As well as some basic reference and debugging information, so that anyone who wanted to start using the feature, even though it's experimental, can start doing it right away. Mike is shaking his head quite a bit over on his side because I learned that from him.
Optimization and debugging, yes, essential. Always have them.
But debugging is an excellent example, right? Because within the time period from 5.3 to 5.4, debugging has been completely redone. So the information that I've written about debugging that currently exists in the documentation does not accurately reflect how debugging will work here in the near future, because the devs decided that it works better if we do it this way, and they completely changed up the user experience and the user interface. So how does that affect the doc?
My face is doing the thing that Jessica said before the live stream went live, where like I am conveying this is the universal experience for all of us.
This is a lot like how it went when Niagara was first introduced in, I think, late versions of Unreal 4. It was the situation where the UI for Niagara, right up until it hit 1.0, was changing like week to week. So the person who was handling it, she'd do a tutorial, and then the next week all the screenshots would already be outdated.
Yeah.
And then we have to go in and replace all of them.
Yeah, and that is not just something that happens like for specific features, and also not just something that happens like when a feature moves through experimental and beta and production ready. It's also something that happened for the entire engine, right? Because after 4.2.7 came 5.0, and I'm sorry for the what I have just caused memory-wise for the two other people, but like that was an entire effort that we had to do because all of our screenshots were suddenly outdated. And one of the things, like one of the truisms for documentation is that it always has to be accurate. It has to be technically accurate. Are we always there? No. But we also have a code repository with thousands of files to maintain. But we had to do a massive migration task of updating all of the screenshots and also choosing which pages to deprecate and so on between 4.2.7 and 5.0, because 5.0 meant a change to all of the UI. And then adding to that, like every time 5.1 has come out, 5.2, 5.3, then all of the sub features and subsets and so on have these little changes to it. And I am not going to name the product because of some NDA stuff, but I have literally just yesterday pinged someone who had given us documentation input, and then I sat with another subject matter expert who looked at the screenshot that had been provided 2 weeks before and said, oh, by the way, this doesn't have this tab configuration anymore. It's set up in a different way. And then I had to contact the QA person who'd written up the first thing and go, by the way, I was just told by this other person. And that sounds chaotic, but it also sounds like that is what happens across the tech industry. Like that kind of chaos is just, you can project that onto IBM will have it, Microsoft will have it, Google will have it. Like that is the experience, the universal experience of technical writers, that kind of thing just kind of waterfalls into our work.
I might have you beat on that one. I wrote the documentation for a feature that will be live later for PCG, and I took a screenshot of debugging that feature, and when I went through review with the devs, they looked at it and was like, this is confusing. We can do this a different way. I am actually almost responsible for the debugging change.
I've had that as well. I've had those as well, not here, but in previous jobs.
So I created more work for myself.
That is also one of the things that can feel vindicating.
So There's a lot of pros and cons to working on a feature that is currently in active development. As I think I mentioned before, we sort of try to avoid documenting a feature that is currently experimental. We want to wait until it at least gets to beta, where sort of the user experience and the UI are less in flux. Working with cutting edge technology is great. The procedural content generation, the tool is amazing. The dev team working on it is amazing. And I get to work closely with them. I get to do, and I'm always amazed at how social being a technical writer is. You know, a lot of people think that maybe we just sit down and write and that's it. Someone slides a pizza under the door every once in a while and make sure our water bottle is full.
That's what I imagined it would be like, yeah.
Totally. When really it's a lot of the actual act of technical writing is only about 25% of my time. The rest is research with the actual documentation, actually planning, significant amount of planning. I use a lot of spreadsheets. And then actually putting it through our publishing pipeline, which in and of itself can be a struggle at times. But it's exciting to work with things that are absolutely brand new. And as someone like me who, you know, has been a user of the engine for, God, 20 years now? Ooh.
Don't say it.
Yeah, I don't even want to think about that. That means that I have been able to see all these great features evolve sort of from the base. And so I really enjoy working it. I've never really lost that awe of being a user, even joining the company. And it's just really fantastic. Now, the con side of that, Kat has a question. That's not the way it came out.
It's not a question. It's just an addition to what you were saying, right? Because you said it was only about 20-25% of your time that's spent writing. And I also just want to like carve that into even more kind of granular segments, because it's not that Jessica is spending 20-25% of her time like fingertips to the keyboard typing. When we say writing, we mean like actually collaborating with subject matter experts. We collaborate with product managers, product owners, designers, developers, QA people, and use like we refer to all of them as subject matter experts. Now, there's a lot of cat herding involved in that because these people are really smart, really busy, and doing a lot of stuff. There's also an element of like, but you're the one who has to write the documentation, so why, like, it's on you now. Why do I? Some are a lot more collaborative than others. In general, the people we have here are really good about it and help us out a lot. But in order for us to be technically accurate, as I said before, the writing part is actually also like meeting with these people, it's collaborating with them, it's iterating on what the content needs to be. As I just pointed out before, like that's also a two-way street, as Jessica also said, of like us coming back and going, hey, as I'm testing the accuracy of this, I'm finding out another thing and so on. And all of that goes into the writing as well. So I think the amount of time that we spend actually typing is much closer to 8%.
Yeah. And as we scroll through the page on the big screen here, you see all the things I have to redo. All of those screenshots have to be redone. All the ones that I've numbered and put a table under, all of that has to be redone. It's going to be great fun.
Every now and then you run into a situation where the only thing to do is just tear down the dock and start it from scratch.
Exactly. I call it job security.
That's actually one of the examples that I'm going to show later is literally us tearing it down and starting from scratch. So like Mike isn't even making it up. Like it's a thing we do.
Yeah. Sometimes it's the best way to go about it. And I this is an insane amount of work, even for just the one doc that you're showing so far, Jessica. There is a comment from chat that I need you to hear because it's hilarious. Just because of the sheer magnitude of what it is that you're doing and what you're working with. But Ichiq from the Twitch chat said, I asked one time if it was possible to get the UE documentation available offline. And they said, yeah, if you got a couple petabytes.
Okay, we actually did a thought exercise like a month ago.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, because someone in the organization asked us how many pages would it require if you print the documentation, and the answer was like hundreds of thousands of pages. And then we did I did a little spot check where I grabbed 15 random pages within the various different subsections that we had. So I grabbed some from the programmer writing sections, I grabbed some from animation, so on and so forth. And then I did an average of okay, how many words are actually, we say page, but how many pages of a Google Doc is a file on average? How many words does that contain? How many screenshots does that contain? How many videos? How many code examples? How many GIFs? And so on. And so I got an average of what does this actually mean? And so we did an estimated word count, and then we went, okay, but if you say that a novel is 60,000 words, how many novels do we have in the 5.3 documentation set? And the answer is 360 novels. And to put it into context, I am an avid reader. I read several books a week. I read 143 novels last year, and I didn't even make it halfway through our documentation.
Wow.
So yeah,
we're a small team, and we take care of thousands of files of documentation. Wizards. I'm sorry,
exactly.
Unicorn wizards.
Yes.
Now I'm gonna have to add that to my Twitter bio.
Yeah. To put a little more perspective on this, Dan, if you could go all the way up to the top again, real quick, all the way to the top, and in the upper left corner, there's a drop down that'll say Unreal Engine 5.x documentation. Yeah, each and every one of those, separate copy of all the source files for the documentation. So if we have to update something because there's a bug in one of the documents, we have to evaluate which versions of the doc need the fix. And we have to do it in each and every single one of those.
Which we just did last week.
Yeah, and then I have to do the merge requests, and it's real nice.
Yeah.
So we have to not only keep in our head all of this, but we have to do it across time in 4 dimensions. It's very, it can be a little overwhelming at sometimes.
I promise, chat, we all love our jobs. We really genuinely do. This job gives me an opportunity. We drink our coffee
and we love our job.
We drink our coffee and we love our job.
Yeah.
And sometimes things stronger than coffee. I personally enjoy educating people. As you know, I've been doing that my entire career. When I started as a teacher in 2005, and now sitting here doing this, I enjoy educating everyone on all the great ways that we can help you achieve your dream of creating a game. And this job absolutely allows me to reach millions of people with my lessons, as opposed to just the classrooms that I used to work with when I taught. Mike, I would love to hear why you would like to do this.
Oh, you want that whole story, huh? Tina, do we have the time?
We got the time. Let's get into it.
Well, so that is a whole story. When I was in college, I went to university with a game development program. 2 of them actually. For undergrad, I went to Michigan State University. For my grad school, I went to Savannah College of Art and Design. And one constant theme, this was back when Unreal Development Kit was in vogue, the kind of free version of Unreal Engine 3 that we used to distribute for indie teams and students to work with. I say we, I wasn't working here at the time. I was in school. You sort of assimilate the identity of the company when you've worked here for almost 5 years.
Or 2.
So Epic distributed Unreal Development Kit. Sorry. And that was back in the days when we still used Unreal Script for programming, and things were very different. There wasn't a whole lot of documentation available. If you wanted to learn how to program in Unreal Engine, you had to either dive into the Unreal Script code base and go spelunking and try to decipher how everything worked, or you had to go on forums and navigate the occasionally, sometimes volatile nature of internet forums in the 2000s and the 1990s to figure out how to do anything. And a lot of times some guy would say, you'd ask a question that was overly broad, get razzed for it, and some guy would say, "Oh, I can do that in 5 minutes."
But they wouldn't give you the answer. At that, just
to taunt you. So it was a really difficult time and a difficult environment to learn how to program a video game. What I wanted to do, I wanted to be a level designer, but I didn't have any games to design levels for. And so I got very frustrated. And then a constant theme throughout, all the years I spent in classes was people were terrified of approaching gameplay programming. They were terrified of programming, particularly in Unreal Development Kit, because a lot of very common, simple functions were not necessarily intuitive for outsiders, like replacing the character model. You remember the Unreal bot that was kind of the default skin in Unreal Development Kit. People didn't know how to change that. People didn't know how to add animations to it. People didn't know a lot of really, really what you would think are basic things. And it intimidated people out of trying to do projects in that tool set. And that, this whole attitude was black magic to work with something that complex. And people would just compromise endlessly on what kinds of ambitions they wanted to approach. They would say, well, okay, I'm never going to do an RPG. I'll just make a one-screen Flash game. Or I'm never going to do a 3D platformer. I'll just do this really simple one-level thing that I can crank out in, what little time I've got between classes. And at some point, I just said, I've had enough. I did an independent study, did the thing where I spelunked the Unreal script code base for a good number of months, and I generated a few tutorials teaching, basically for students at SCAD to make a side-scrolling platformer or a racing type game. So it was a game mode that mostly was piggybacking off of the existing gameplay, and then a side-scrolling platformer, a significant change in how the gameplay worked. And that was significant because people were trying to do that sort of thing in Kismet, which is not an object-oriented programming language. It was, the level scripting system. And it was very, very powerful, and we could do a lot of unexpected things with it. But you weren't going to go work at a AAA game company and make the core gameplay in Kismet. It's just not going to happen, right? And we'd run into things like you try to make a cannon or something, right? I did that for a project once. In order to make that work, I had to create 5 copies of a projectile and load them in a hopper, an invisible hopper, and move them to the muzzle and shoot them, and then have them put themselves back in this object pool. But I had to instantiate and code each one of them individually from each other because that's how Kismet worked. It wasn't meant for that sort of thing. And in a real game, you would spawn a projectile and shoot it, and that's it. And the projectile, every projectile would have the same behavior, and you could guarantee that. You get what I'm saying. There were just easier ways to do all of the things we were doing. I knew it, and I wanted to show people how to do it. And when I got these tutorials done, it was 120 pages of Unreal script tutorials that I wrote. Including one for doing scale form user interfaces, which was a whole thing, because that's what Unreal Development Kit used at the time for UI was scale form, this thing where you overlay Flash on top of your game. It made a huge difference overnight, almost overnight. We went from students being terrified to approach Unreal Development Kit for a 10-week long project, a semester long, a quarter at SCAD, a quarter long project, to using it confidently for game jams. And some of the game jam games that they put out after I gave out these tutorials were more polished than a lot of the things that we saw coming through from these multi-week long endeavors. And it was just, all they needed was this little boost, this little demystification of the code base and how you work with the inheritance in Unreal Engine and how you make actors and how you swap models and all this stuff. As soon as they had this little tiny bit of knowledge, they just flew. I remember this one really impressive one where they made like a submersible kind of game, like a side-scrolling submersible thing. It was, sorry, I'm kind of going all over the place now, but it was the most gratifying thing that I ever experienced when I was in school. It was, you know, at that moment, I said to myself, okay, if I were to, if I, you know, can't do the thing literally every game development student wants to do and be the director of all my own games or whatever, then the 9-to-5 job that I could do every day and not get tired of is writing these tutorials and making sure that the next guy who comes along, or girl, or they, or whatever, next person that comes along wanting to make their own Final Fantasy or their own Mario 64 or whatever in Unreal Engine can do that, can at least get started and not feel like they're, you know, grabbing around in the dark. You know, I wanna make sure people can do that. I wanna make sure people can take these ambitious projects and make them real, and not just go, oh well, I wish I could have done that, because it's one of the most crushing things. I've watched people lose sight of that, and I sorry, getting a little over emotional here, but
no, I completely understand.
Mike,
the point is though, that was that was when I figured out I wanted to do this, and I wanted to try and get this job inside of Epic Games. I figured that would be the ideal place where I could get this kind of information and share it. 7 years later, I finally got this job after a number of years working in video games and actually, you know, releasing titles. I had been applying all that time, and it was only after somebody who I knew from SCAD gave me a recommendation that it finally went through. Yeah, ever since I've been here, I've not been disappointed with this work one bit. This is exactly what I've always wanted to do.
This is awesome. I love that.
We're in a polite stand-up again.
You first, Gina. You were first.
I'm gonna win.
Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna quickly say that I love that for both of you. You mentioned that it's specifically, it comes from a place of wanting to help people, really, at the core of it, which is, I think, a very strong foundation to build a project or a career or whatever off of, because it's passion. It's wanting to genuinely help your fellow developer be able to actually do what they want, and that's a beautiful thing. So
it's gonna make my origin. Yeah, so was I. Like, as one, it's gonna make my origin story sound like I'm completely full of myself. But two, I also just want to point out, like as one of the managers in this team, like as Jessica said, she reports to me, and Mike reports to my peer. But like, you are both such passionate technical writers. Like, you are advocates for the users, you are advocates for the developers, you're also advocates for all of the other stakeholders. So the fact that you are still getting emotional and love your job that much, like, makes my little manager heart just bloom.
I'm gonna get all misty-eyed over here.
Yeah, I mean, that is basically one of my goals, is to make Jessica cry at least once a week.
Usually for good reasons.
Usually it's onion-related reasons, actually.
True. I do love to cook quite a bit.
Layers. Tina, save us.
Okay, all right.
So I feel like I took over from Jessica for a very long time there.
I'm looking at my notes here. I did a quick little set of notes for these because I always got to keep my ADHD brain organized. Back to talking about PCG docs, even though we are all very passionate folks. There are, of course, some cons with working with something that is currently, in production and currently being changed. Is, PCG is so popular that marketing loves to talk about PCG. And I love that. That's a pro, but it's also a con a little bit when docs get out of date and it's something that everybody is constantly looking at. People notice and people tend to take to social media and be like, this doesn't match what is in the engine right now. And, I simultaneously apologize for that and not apologize for that. There is a crap ton of work, as we have talked about. Mm-hmm. And, living in the chaos of constant change that is a constantly developing feature, having to redo the images quite a bit, having to redo steps inside of a tutorial. In my PCG overview, I do a quick thing about how to create a forest very quickly. I need to go back and test that again to make sure that all of those steps are still relevant. We, as technical writers, try to write what we call evergreen information, information that does not get old very fast at all. But, we work in the software industry and things change every 3 months or every 3 days, depending on what you're working on. But, when it comes down to it, every time they make a big change to PCG, it creates a lot of work that slows down the creation of other docs. I have 10 other docs I want to do for this section that I'm going to be really excited to introduce to everyone when I get them done. But in the end, even with all of that, I still love working on cutting edge tech that I know that everyone will be able to build amazing levels with. Now I'm done.
Lovely.
You're probably going to ask a lot of questions, Tina, but if you're okay with it, I would like to share a bit of my origin story because one of the things that is apparent in what Jessica and Mike just said is that the entry point into becoming a technical writer can be so vastly different, right? So Jessica has an educational background and has like a long-standing history of teaching Unreal Engine. Mike is coming from this incredibly altruistic approach, actually. As I said, my origin story is going to sound like borderline like I'm full of myself. But my first job out of uni was as a translator because of my linguistics background, and I worked for an agency that specialized in software translation and linguistic quality assurance. And so I translated a lot of docs. And after having done that for a year and a half, I basically flipped the table and went, I can write this better. And so someone sent me a job description for something called a technical writer and went like, I don't know what this is, but it sounds like you. And I went, yeah, that does sound like me. And so to begin with, in my first job, it was just like, I want to transition into this role. I want to be more of an active writer and so on. But then what really made me sink my teeth into technical writing is all of the surrounding elements that we've already touched upon, because technical writing is also diplomacy. It's relationship management, it's stakeholder management. It's really hard, but it's also really fun. And it like when a document is brought to fruition, that is like such an achievement that you can internalize, because like it's just, like it is, as you say, it is magical. And you did all the summoning, right? You gathered all of the components, you talked to all of the various different like creatures and so on, and you did the thing, and the spell worked. And that is amazing. That is like as a writer's perspective. And then one of the reasons I've become a manager instead of staying a writer is because I love tanking. Like we talked about that, right? I'm a paladin tank.
Paladins, yes.
A paladin. I love having those stakeholder conversations cross-disciplinary. Like I love sitting down with development leads and going, look, you want good documentation, so you have to do these and these things. Like do these parts of your job so we can do ours, which sounds aggressive, but actually works. It's a phrase that works. So I love advocating for docs. There's my dog. So I love advocating for docs, like for the role in a company. And it's the thing, like having been in so many different companies, both in gaming and in enterprise, I've always been passionate about bettering the situation for technical writers, but also actually still akin to what Mike and Jessica are saying. I've always been aware that the end product of what I do affects people's livelihoods. A product that has documentation is used by someone who earns their wages, who feeds their children, who pays their mortgage through the success of what they're doing. And that is powerful.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a deep cut.
Full stop.
It's true though, because exactly, like you said, this is something people are basing their entire livelihoods off of, and with it being fueled by people like Mike and Jessica who are putting their all into making sure that it's functioning exactly as it should for that purpose. It's a strong bond we developers have with our writers, or we should.
It is.
Sadly, a lot of
give a
it's
hug
based
to your
on
tech
trauma.
writers.
Also, I mean, like there's also an element of like we're talking like what we're all talking about also kind of has to do with like making sure that everyone has a seat at the table, and like there's advocating for us, but like we have a further downstream element that we also constantly have to bring in and help create space for, which is localization. Our documentation, our product is localized into various different languages, and so that's actually also a thing that we have to include in our train of thought. We have to include in the way that we set up our repository. We have to include it in when we have a staging environment. Does it actually allow for localization to do their LQA properly, linguistic quality assurance? We even have to implement it in our writing. There are technical writing best practices for how to write to international audiences and so on. Some of them are I'm saying this as a linguist. Some of them are a bit redundant, but some of them are actually really important. So that's something that we're also constantly aware of upskilling ourselves and our team in technical writing, both to, like, as we said, provide the user with the information that they need when they need it and how they need it, but also to enable that to be successful across various different languages by also enabling the success of the next downstream team. So again, no pressure.
I feel like the thing I'm going to be repeating through all this is just no big deal. Don't worry about it. Just don't think about it too hard. It's fine. Whatever. It's not a lot all the time. It's fine. I do have a couple questions here for you, Jessica, before we move on. The first is, what would you say, and you talked a little bit about this, but I think they're wondering for just like maybe more your perspective on it. What would you say is the biggest difference between writing for a very specific tool or feature versus a more broad general topic?
Really, it's the depth I can get into with it. If I'm writing for, like, the first book I wrote was a book on how to use Unreal Engine 4 in Blender, and I only had a budget of 300 pages, which sounds like a lot, but it really wasn't. When you think about what I had to teach for that, using Blender as a software, creating something in it, creating a pipeline for getting things from Blender into Unreal, documenting that pipeline and showing that, then bringing it into Unreal and then using it and texturing it and making sure everything was working. I did not have the chance in my first book to get into the depth that I wanted to. And there's always, any author, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, will tell you there's always so much more that we wanted to say. And when you work with something more specific like PCG, in the PCG sections, I'm only talking about PCG. One of the things that you have to do as a technical writer is understand when you need to write out the steps for something versus just linking to it so that people who don't know how to do that can just go straight to it. Kat?
Everything Jessica just said. Also knowing when to kill your darlings, because if you're writing about a general subject, like it's kind of like writing an essay. You get to write whatever you want, kind of, but as I said before, like we differentiate in technical writing between types of knowledge. So you have conceptual knowledge, what is the thing? You have instructional knowledge of like how like install it this way in order to apply the shader to the thing, do this thing. And then we have reference. And so knowing when to provide what, and not just on a specific page, but whether or not that has to be a separate page, is demanding. And also, it has to be skimmable, because you have to be aware of the fact that no one goes to the documentation because they want to read it. People go to the documentation because they've already encountered an issue in the UI. They don't know how the thing works. They are frustrated. We don't get to write like necessarily the inspirational material. Sometimes we do, and we love it. And as one of the managers, that's something that we try to divvy out among the writers, right? Like, hey, Jessica, you get to do this thing, because that is something that, you know, everyone wants to sink their teeth into. But we do also have to write the very straightforward stuff that has to, as I say, provide what is needed, when it's needed, and how it's needed. And we also have to be mindful in the communication of that. And it's all the way down to formatting, like which bit of information, if you have all of it on one page, which order does it follow? How do you format your instructions? How many bullet points do you use for the instructions? Do you use an Oxford comma or not? The answer is yes. So on and so forth. Like all of those things that we have to take into account in order to make sure that when the user encounters the problem of, I don't know how this works, and then goes and consults the documentation, we have to answer their question before they're even asking it. And that is like the thing of writing for a specific technical thing, full stop.
All of that, plus the reason why I actually do my level design writing outside of my job is so that I can do the inspirational stuff, because I love that part as well. You know, all of what Kat said, plus writing for something like PCG where I can focus on one feature as opposed to a variety of features, definitely allows me to go more in depth to the level that I want. The problem with that is the problem that Kat brought up. How do I chunk the information so it's easy to skim? How do I set up my headings so they're clear, so that somebody who's having a problem generating a bush as opposed to a tree can go, oh, that's what I needed to find right there. Because, you know, previously as a teacher, I know y'all don't read the docs. You don't. You look for the specific thing that you're looking for, and if you can't find it within 4 minutes, 3 minutes,
or 30 seconds,
yeah, you go off to you go off to YouTube. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
We want you to stay. So hence, I'm going to write it in such a way that you are going to find the information fast, find the information clearly, and can apply it to your situation.
Yeah. And then an entire element of that, like we've said it several times, but is also we have to put ourselves in the mindset of the people that need this, right? So as I said, I documented virtual production, which, you know, the broad understanding of it is like that entire setup that was used for filming The Mandalorian, like where they built like a massive, they collated like TV screens in a massive circle and then rendered the background onto it, and then used a camera that already does special effects just when filming and so on. But it actually affects so many more things. Like I mentioned that there's something that involves the scene camera. The scene camera and sequencer and so on is used in video games for animation and so on. And so one of the things I documented that was generated by the virtual production thing, because it was relevant to that initially, but is actually a really nice feature in Unreal in general, is the thing called the media play actor. Because before 5.1, in order to play back media within your game, you had to like manually set it up, and it was really fussy and so on, and it didn't always work. It was kind of like a black box. And so in 5.1, you know, in collaboration with various other teams, including rendering and so on, they created this actor where you just add it, and then it has all of the things. So you can add like a rectangle or a sphere. And then if you use the custom EXR format, the really neat thing is your frustum of your camera, regardless of whether or not you're using like the virtual production actual in-camera VFX one, or if it's the camera within your game. If you're using the EXR format, then it only streams what is visible in your frustum. The reason that is super awesome is because that kind of minimizes the budget that you're using for actually rendering, right? And so knowing that, I didn't have to write anything inspirational, because the point is just like minimize your budget, use this thing, right? Do the thing easier. If you do it, it has this built-in feature. So I didn't have to write anything inspirational, because this is literally something that we are selling to people, or providing for people either that know that they're going to use it in this specific setup and know that they have that budget, or in this specific setup and they know they have that budget. So we don't have to, like, I didn't have to kind of help inspire them. I just had to provide them with the information. This is how you install the actor. If you want to use it specifically in virtual production setups, you do that here. So that was a separate page. And then also, I just said, if you use the custom EXR format. So I have a page about how do you convert your media into the EXR format. And so that's a lot more like narrow scope of what you actually need to supply, but it's very specific for the exact audience that will use that feature.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, there's one more question I want to toss at you real quick, Jessica, and then we'll move on to some of the other examples y'all brought for us today. This one is probably, if I had to guess, from someone who also follows you on social media, but they're wondering if you find that social media helps you with parts of your job, especially in regards to writing about new or experimental features, or if it's just noise that you have to tune out. Or my addition to this question, is it sometimes both?
Why not both? Yeah, I have to agree with you on that, Tina. Sometimes it's really great. You guys in the community catch some of the things that we don't catch. Even when, we've looked at it, part of our process is we looked at it, the devs looked at it, and then someone else in our team has done an editorial pass on it. And sometimes even with all those eyes on it, being on the inside, sometimes we have blinders on as to what the you guys are using the feature for. I mean, one thing that I always used to teach my students was you don't control what the player is going to do with your game, so you always have to try to guess. It's the same thing with software features. We don't control how you're going to use PCG, and some of you have created some amazing stuff with PCG and some of these other great features that we have in the engine that we did not originally design for. So sometimes you guys will catch things, send me a message. I just actually received a message today about something that I need to pass on to someone else, which reminds me. And then we can get it fixed. You guys are great. I get thank you messages a lot, which, warms my black soul. And sometimes it's just noise. There is a certain belief about the documentation in certain parts of the online community. And I just tune those out. I don't need that in my life. So for the most part, if you follow me on social media, you'll get when I like to talk about things that I'm writing about if it's something that I can talk about. I like to talk about level design, so I get a lot of UEFN creators that reach out to me to ask about level design. And those are some really great conversations. Sometimes I just post about food, which is, and a lot of times, because I was a teacher, I like to retweet resources that I think somebody who's learning UEFN or UE can use. I will retweet tutorials from other devs. And I've made a lot of friends on social media in the game dev community, both indies and creators and people who work at larger companies. So it has been, I think, more positive than negative. I love social media, maybe too much. My therapist tells me to kind of tone it down a little bit, but that's because the world is on fire.
Well, side effects. Also,
I'd actually love to chime in about the social media thing too, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
So for me, I tend to lean a little more on the side of noise from my side of things. A lot of the time what happens is I'll do an Inside Unreal stream, for instance, or post about something that I'm working on that's new and exciting, like a common UI tutorial. Like one time on Twitter, I put a whole tutorial for how to do button icon substitutions, just very informally. If I were to do that now, I'd probably be doing that in the Epic developer community instead, and then link it on Twitter, because that's just a much better way to look at a tutorial, even an informal one. But anyway, however it happens, people see the stuff, they love it, they thank me for it, and then they also come to me with their technical support questions. Like asking me how to solve some bug in how they've set up one system or another. Sometimes it'll be like helpfully pointing out something that's off on the documentation, or a bug that's in the documentation. But a lot of the time, they're asking me how to solve the specific problem that they're working on in their game. And I have to tell them, listen, I would love to help out each and every single person who reaches out to me like this. I would love to personally walk you through how to solve every issue with this, because I love this technology and I want you to use it and have a good time using it. I also have a dozen other directions from which I am getting my priorities inside of the company. I have so many things. So there's the stuff that's coming through for the next release, for example. We've always got a sheet of the features that are getting substantial updates, or the new features that are coming through, and that dictates a lot of our priorities with what documentation we do. Then we've got requests from developers inside of Epic. Maybe there's something that they've noticed that's out of date, or maybe there's something that is being updated for GDC or something like that. And then there's to put it lightly, we do have a number of licensees across the world using the technology and also making requests for tutorials. And so, like I said, I'd love to help everybody who's working with Unreal directly. I'd love to work with people on social media to fix everything. But I can't, because I'm already doing all this other work that's coming through official channels.
You are but one man, yeah.
Yeah, and like adding to those official channels, not only do we have licensees requesting stuff, we also have an entire support organization that funnel questions to us, so they can actually, because they are actually our first audience, right? Like the people that are providing support for users are generally the ones that know where to find anything in the documentation. Secondarily, it's QA, because they can use the documentation in order to form test cases, or the other way around, we build our documentation on their test cases, depending on where we are in the stream.
And QA are superheroes, let me tell you.
Superheroes, absolute super, like celebrate your QA people. QA are devs. Anyway, but so support will also ask us or provide us with overviews of frequently asked questions and so on. So we funnel that into the documentation. And also, like, these writers, every once in a while, their manager will also just go do this thing because of reasons that I can't elaborate. And which is also an official channel, right? Like both of these two lovely writers were derailed last week because we had to ask them to do a thing of which we cannot say anymore.
I have worked on so many docs that I cannot talk about, and that a lot of people probably will not see because they are NDA as heck.
I can talk about most of my stuff, but that's because I don't work on the same things Mike does.
It's platforms, right? It's like, I had to do documentation for consoles right around UE5, for instance. So it's like, yeah, that's a thing that the public is not going to know that I'm working on, and that's not going to be super visible outside of like the licensee world where people are working on these consoles. But yeah, this is all just to say, we do hear you. We don't want to ignore questions or anything like that. We don't want to brush off anybody. For a while, I was even trying to help people out when I could. But after a while, I had to admit to myself, no, I don't have the bandwidth to keep doing this. I gotta just tell them I'd love to help, but here's some other channels that might work better for you, and point them at the community. Thank you, Tina, by the way.
I mean, I have to say that it's the actual community themselves that do a lot of the heavy lifting for all of us. So also,
They do.
Thank you, everyone watching.
And I know I talked about forums being kind of nasty way back in the day. It's so much nicer now than it used to be. It's the community is, everybody wants everybody else to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having such in-depth documentation that they can be able to easily hand out to people who are new, like with Unreal Engine 5 when it dropped, we got such a surplus of brand new developers who came into it, right? And a lot of them had just never touched Unreal ever before, or may have never even tried developing ever on any platform with any engine. So just diving straight into it, having that foundational documentation for them to be able to reference and learn from and build off of was so helpful.
But it's something
so necessary.
It's something that we appreciate as well. Like we monitor like the forums, and like, because as Jessica said before, sometimes we're wrong about so we've talked a lot about this entire like targeting an audience and so on, right? But sometimes it kind of basically comes down to all of the subject matter experts, us including, doing this. And then being like, what do the people need? I think maybe this. But as Jessica also said, like, we don't dictate how you use the things. And some of the worst people to actually estimate how things are used are the people that develop them. However, they are our first port of call for getting the first input for the documentation. So actually seeing how the community uses the various different things and which questions you ask each other and so on is really great for us. So like, that's actually something that we keep an eye out for in official and non-official capacities in order to feed that back into the documentation. So
I mean,
thanks for helping us do our job.
A great example of that is this past year in 2023, I went to Unreal Fest. I'm wearing my Unreal Fest shirt this year, as a guest, not as an Epic employee, and to be able to sit in the sessions and see what our educators and our evangelists are teaching. And I even got to meet some of the community who recognized me from Twitter, and that's always surreal, by the way. And talk to them and find out how they're using things. Being able to actually talk to the people who are teaching it and talk to the people who are using it helps inform what needs to be in the docs.
Yeah. God, there's so many different threads to keep hold of. How do you do this?
I have a notebook. I forget everything if I don't write it.
Also, we drink the coffee. We love our jobs.
We drink the coffee.
We love our jobs.
The coffee.
Yes. And we love our job. All right. Mike, I think you also had some examples that you wanted to walk us through of some of the docs that you've been working on recently as well, correct?
As a matter of fact, I do. One moment while I share my screen.
Absolutely. I feel like we should have like specific waiting music for getting screen share set up. I'll work on it. I'll put it in the budget somewhere. I think we can do this.
Can we license the Wii Shop music? Because I think everyone in the community would love
All
that.
right, I've got it up on my screen. It looks like everybody can see it. So Jessica talked a whole lot about documentation for features that are brand new, like not just leading edge but bleeding edge kind of features. I want to talk a little bit about features that are not so new, because those have their own challenges. So normally, if we're working on a feature for a major release that's upcoming, the developers tell us about it. The release team, marks it down in a schedule that we can refer to, and we get some pre-doc, whether it's in the form of bullet pointed items that we just have to resolve into documentation somehow, or a full walkthrough that the developer themselves wrote that we have to edit, or just a straight up interview with a developer over over Zoom. There's all kinds of ways that we get the information in, but the bottom line is the developers have the information fresh in their head. They just built the feature, so they can tell us practically everything about it. One example of that in the documentation I work on is view models, which is this plugin for UMG that basically gives you a way to bind variables to fields in your user interface without the terrible performance drawbacks of the default binding system. I highly, highly recommend using this if you are in any way making a complicated UI for a game. This is a really helpful feature, and I can't stress enough how much I love this thing. But yeah, I was able to talk with the developers directly as they were building this thing. I was able to get direct updates as soon as the blueprint features for view models became available. Initially, you could only make it in C++. And so you had to go through this whole thing of defining view model classes in C++ in order to be able to make one. And then maybe you could do some of the process in Blueprint if you were very, very fortunate. But then in 5.3, at least I'm pretty sure it was 5.3, sometimes they blur together a little bit. I'm sorry.
Time has ceased to have.
What even is time?
In 5.3, that's when all the Blueprint functionality went live, and I was able to get direct from Patrick, who had been working on this, Patrick Bouteau. I hope I pronounced his name right. I might bring up a lot of names of people that I'm not pronouncing right because they are either French or Scandinavian or various other things. I apologize to those people if they are watching, but
you're doing your best.
The point is, Patrick was able to give me direct information about all of this, and I was able to get it together relatively quickly and straightforwardly. That is the best case scenario for a lot of the stuff that we document. For other stuff,
TM.
Let me sing you the song of my people. Yeah. So there are other sections of documentation that are for features that are, shall we say, venerable. Things that a lot of times in programming, especially, actually, there's things that are part of the engine that are really, really integral and important. But that have not changed in like 10 years because it's not broken, so you don't have to fix it. And some of those things were not documented initially. And so we have to go back and address this documentation debt that sometimes occurs. One example of this is anything having to do with tools programming for Unreal Editor, anything customizing Unreal Editor. There's not a whole lot of material about that. It's actually a very opaque process, and very few people, write tutorials about it. That is a section that I have been doing a lot of work in as of the last couple of versions of UE. So, for instance, there is an editor modules page now, in addition to the base Unreal Engine C++ module. This wasn't documented either for quite some time. I think I got this in like 427 or something like that. Editor modules are a whole other subset because editor modules get stripped out when you build for a standalone game. And you need to put your editor functionality in this. So there's a tutorial for that now. And then details panel customization. This was a situation where whoever came up with the system for customizing details panels, the panel on the right-hand side that shows you all your variables that you want to edit. Whoever did this way back in the day, we don't know who it was. it could have been Tim Sweeney for all we know. I'm not sure about that. I'm wildly throwing that off the top of my head just to illustrate the sheer, how old some of this stuff can be. That's not a serious suggestion. But point being, he has written a lot of code. You never know. The point being, though, that there's not a person who I can look at on the org chart and definitely say, yeah, this is the person who can tell me about how to program a details panel. So I had to do a lot of detective work and a lot of what I call archaeology to put together these guides. I worked with a couple of developers, namely Karen Jirek and Patrick Buteau, to get this together. Everybody had like a piece of the puzzle in some way. There was this old internal doc from a couple of years ago that I think Patrick might have worked on that explained a lot of things about how it worked under the hood, but it was all things like how the detail system connected with the Unreal reflection system, and turned stuff from the C++ U property specifiers and whatnot into details. Not as straightforward, like walkthrough information on doing details customizations as I would have liked to see. And so I had to decipher some of that. I had to talk with Karen for a little while because she was working on the details panel, improving performance with it and things like that. And eventually I was able to get from her the names of a number of functions that are used to customize details. What is it, Kat?
Continue, but I have an addition afterwards.
Okay, fair enough. I will come back to you then. But anyway, yeah, she gave me the first couple of leads in terms of major functions that I had to go through, like customize header and customize children. And from there, I went into the Unreal Engine codebase. In C++, I did Control-Shift-F, like this. I put that in, I hit Find All, might take a second, and, oh, it's giving me no matches. Oh, because I gave it the fully qualified name. There we go. So, yeah, do Control-Shift-F search to find all the instances of it, and there are thousands of instances of customized children being passed around, and different ways that custom widgets are being added to the details panel. This one in particular, yeah, I looked at this one. This was the gameplay tag creation widget, where it's got like custom drop downs and things like that for picking your picking your tags out of a list or adding them to your list, or what have you. There's other classes, going off on tangents here, but all throughout the code base there are examples of how to use this function, so that if you ever get confused about how a function should be properly formatted, how the different properties go in, as parameters for the function, that's one way that you can find out how it's supposed to be formatted. And not only that, how it is implemented, inside of our own organization. With those leads, I was able to go to Patrick Buteau, and I was able to ask him, all right, so here are the features I'm trying to do with details customization. Can you give me a list of all of the different things that you would want a new programmer to do if they were joining the UI team today? Like what would you want them to be able to do with details customizations? Because there's a whole lot of things you could do with it. You can insert any kind of widget at all. You can insert customized ways of looking at structs. You can reorder the properties in whatever way you want. You can just put an entire button in that automates like an import process from some text file somewhere, just tons and tons and tons of stuff you could do. And I didn't know where to start. So I was like, all right, what are your like top 5 things that you want people to do? And Patrick gave me a list. So he came up with a couple of things. Reordering and hiding properties was one of them. So I wrote a tutorial for that. Some stuff about how to refresh the details panel, because you'd need to manually refresh the details panel. How to work with custom edit conditions. So making features hide based on other parameters, for instance. And after I gathered all those up, I was like, okay, what are some examples in the code base that you would say are especially good to look at? And I looked those up, and I built my tutorials based off of what I saw in those. And then I was able to bring it all back to Karen and Patrick for review. And that's how this entire section on details panel customization came to be. That was a process that took quite a lot of time. I'd be able to do it quicker now after refining that process with them and getting more comfortable going through the editor customization code. I was expecting a lot more manual creation of Slate widgets, but it turns out that there are actually classes all over Unreal Engine for helping with customize certain parts of the editor. So there's another one I'm working on with Sebastian Arlide. I think that's how I pronounce his last name. Arlide, I don't know. I am sorry, Sebastian. There's another feature called tool menus. And this is basically what you use to... Oh, I don't have Unreal Editor up. I'm sorry. I'm not going to open it because it might take a minute. Basically, tool menus is the system that you use to add new drop-downs like the file or edit menu, at the top of the Unreal Editor window. And making new foldouts nested inside of it and things like that. There's a whole helper class called utool menus that just does that. I've got that tutorial in the works, and that's going to be a whole section just like this details panel stuff. And it's the same process of tracking down examples and such, except Sebastian, gave me some tutorials as well. So that was very, very helpful. So that should give you an idea of what kind of archaeology and detective work we need to do in order to get some of these older things documented. I've had to do this for tools programming stuff. I have had to do this for chunk downloader. I've had to do this for some gameplay ability related stuff. There's all kinds of systems that have not been touched for a number, hadn't been touched. Gameplay abilities are getting touched a lot more nowadays. But that, weren't necessarily on the roadmap in terms of the next release and the major features that are coming out, but that I felt were important, that needed to be represented in the documentation in some way, and that needed this type of investigation in order to get documented. And just to brag about one more thing that I've done, because Kat seemed pretty eager for me to do this, there is an entire creating user interfaces section now. The tools programming stuff is not located here. That is under setting up your production pipeline, scripting and automating the Unreal Editor. That's where that is located, because that's the place that most made sense, we felt. But everything else has been consolidated from other sections of the docs, so that all your UMG and Slate programming stuff is in one spot now, including all the stuff for plugins, all of the stuff for handling optimization, including the UMG and Slate optimization guidelines page. Hint, hint, you should read this before building UIs. This is very useful information. This is another one that needed a lot of special research too, by the way. the UI team was very, very helpful in compiling a list of tips that they wanted represented, but getting it into a readable format was more the tricky part there. But anyhow, yeah, it was this thing where the Slate stuff previously lived. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, here's the 5.1 documentation. To find UMG, you went to Making Interactive Experiences, which is a little bit of a vague title to begin with, but this is basically gameplay programming. Then you went to UMG UI Designer, and then there was all of the subsections for UMG. If you go back farther than that, there wouldn't be subsections, that they would all just be spread out in the table of contents, unordered in just one big, long, impenetrable list. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes a section will outgrow itself. It starts seeming like a relatively simple thing. Oh yeah, we'll just have a UMG section. And then all of a sudden you have 100 pages in that section. And it's like, maybe we need categories.
Landscape.
Yes.
Rendering.
It happens all over the docs. And we have literally written guidelines on how to fix this kind of thing. But yeah, this is where UMG was. It was under Making Interactive Experiences. And then to find Slate programming, you went to Programming and Scripting. And then there was the Slate UI programming section with its own set of documentation underneath it. And this was after I did a lot of editing and consolidation here already. But with the new Creating User Interfaces section, it's in one spot. So, whichever system you're working in, if you're working in the UMG editor, you can look at that right here. And if you need to know how it works under the hood in C++ a little bit more, the Slate UI stuff is directly adjacent to it. So you can navigate to it a little bit more easily and hopefully understand the relationship between them a little bit more clearly. One of the reasons that this was really important, I felt, was the optimization and debugging sections, because when you are debugging, you're not using like a special UMG only or a special Slate only debugging tool. The widget reflector is the same widget reflector for both systems, because UMG is just, a WYSIWYG editor built on top of Slate. Well, not just, it's a little more complicated than that, but you get the idea. It's the user-friendly version of working with it, the visual version of working with it, but it's the same thing. It's still S widgets all the way down. The previous way of organizing it made it feel like the debugging tools were only for working in Slate, or the optimization guidelines were only for working in Slate, which just isn't the case. There's still a lot more work that needs to be done in this section in terms of creating a valid learning path. But this, I feel like this is a good start to making the relationship between these pieces, these layers, a lot clearer for people.
Just more proof that Doc's work is never done.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so if I can take over with my addition to what Mike is saying, all of that work. And yes, Mike, I always want you to brag about that kind of thing, because like just the scale and scope of what Mike did there is huge, right? Like it's so much work. There's so much like contacting different SMEs and collaborating with them, as you said, with archaeology, there's investigation and so on. The addition that I have that I would love for users to also be aware of is what I said earlier with regards to, as technical writers, we work in setups that are akin to developers, right? We have repositories, we have individual files, as Jessica mentioned earlier, like each thing you see in the table of content is an individual file in a repository, in a stream for that version. So what happens generally when you touch legacy code? everything falls apart, right? So making all of those reorganizations, Mike had to keep a strict overview of what is the file path in the repository? Am I renaming it to something? Am I moving it from one folder in the repository to another one? Mike created a spreadsheet with 3 tabs and an average of 100 lines in each tab. And the reason I know that is because I then had to do the merge request for it. So that was like an intense week and a half where Mike and I were iterating because he had done all of that work, all of that investigation, all of that writing and so on. But then we had to make the backend actually fit so that we could render it in that order that you're now seeing. And that in itself required a second level of investigation that none of you will ever see, because it was purely in how do we make this system, how do we make these changes correct in our backend? And how do we then merge that into the static website that you're seeing? So that's an element of technical writing as well. And Mike, I'm so glad you kept explaining, and I just have an addition for after, because the more you explain with regards to, and then I did it here, and then I did it here, and then I did it here, and that in itself sounds huge and you have your coffee and you love your job. But then there's the extra element to it. And then also adding to that, something that Jessica mentioned before is there was a SPE review / tech review, and there was an editorial review. So we have these 2 extra elements into all of the work that we do. We have what we call a tech review, which is in order for our content to be technically correct, it has to be signed off on by a subject matter expert. So those are the ones that we collaborate with and so on, but we also have to be able to point and say, this subject matter expert who has this expertise, whether or not it's a product manager or a QA person or so on, has signed off on the technical correctness of this. Then the page gets sent for an internal review within the documentation team, because we have a style guide that we adhere to. We have to make sure that we use the same kind of phrasing. We have to make sure that we capitalize words in the same manner. We have to make sure, as I said, there are various different best practices for how you present this information and so on. So we have to make sure that we live up to those. So that is an internal peer review. So just imagine for every single file these changes are made to, Mike has had to get that technical, first collaborate with the people, do the investigation, rewrite it, get a technical review for it. Then internally go, can anyone review this according to the style guide? And as Jessica mentioned earlier, we get blinders on. The phrase I use is we get snowblind. You're staring so much at it that you do not see the typo anymore. So you have to have a second level of your peer has to go through it in that way. Then you have to go into your repository, move all the stuff around. By the way, it's not just the stuff that you're moving around. You now also have to check all of the things that cross-link to the page, because other parts of the documentation suite will go here's the page over here, but you've just moved that page. So your cross-link doesn't actually work. So just the pure amount of work that Mike has had to do in that end was weeks. Creating that spreadsheet took him weeks to get to that point. Then we also have the element of that actually has to be merged into and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
so
it actually took months. We tried to do this reorg for 5.2, and then I had to abort it because it was introducing too many bugs too close to launch.
Yeah.
And that had its own problems. That introduced some bugs for localization too, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
So we had to spend some time fixing that relatively smaller mess. It was just a couple of pages, but it's all the same. It was inconvenient.
And then add to that as well, the first point that we were talking about. What happens when in the middle of all of that work, the UI changes? Because there's also that element. Mike is now several months into his work. He's had everything tech reviewed and so on. He starts sending it onwards, and then someone goes, oh, by the way, I updated this thing here. And so okay, great, let's flip the table, drink the coffee, and love our job. So by the way, if any of you ever think that the table of content in general for the doc site doesn't make a lot of sense, we know. We've the 2 years I've been here, I have my 2-year anniversary exactly 1 week from now, and I think every month we talk about reorganizing the entire table of content. We all want to do it. We want to slice and dice it. We want to pull it apart and then put it back together to kind of change some of the things that Mike was also saying. Like once you have a bucket to put stuff into, that ends up being the bucket that you put stuff into. And then suddenly a section in the table of content is just kind of like the catch-all section. And like Mike and I have vented and ranted many times about the fact that some virtual production stuff is in the scripting section. Why? We don't know. So we want to do this slicing and dicing, but as we've just kind of illustrated, just doing it for a subsection that maybe comes down to what, 25 pages is enormous work.
I'm pretty sure it's more pages than that, but
of course it is.
Yeah,
100 pages out of the suite that, or even if it's 200 pages, like we have thousands of pages.
If you move one page and like dozens of other pages have a link to it, we still have to go in and change the page path for all of those, or else we have to ask somebody on the back end to make a redirect, which is, for a lot of reasons, is not an ideal situation. And then ideally, you try and save localization the trouble of copying your fixed link in their versions of the docs. So you go into the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean versions of those docs and fix those links too.
Right. Yeah.
It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. There's a lot to do.
I think a lot of that all highlights the fact that all of us have a section or sections that we're very passionate about. You know, for me, it's PCG and landscape. I've wanted to update the landscape section for version pretty much almost since I got here. And I haven't been able to touch it yet because there's only so many hours in a day, and I only have so many hands.
And
I was preoccupied with the mobile sections for long enough. Like I got here wanting to do tools programming in 2019, and it took me until the last year and a half or so to finally really break the ice on tools programming because I have enough other sections to deal with.
I would actually really like to use these 2 points that these two have just made to segue over to my examples, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Because there is an addition to what Mike and Jessica are saying, which is, music. Where's the music coming from? Am I the only one hearing it?
No, okay. I hear it.
You're good.
I hear it, yeah.
Ooh, that was super distracting. Yeah, so in addition
dope
to...
music, though.
In addition to what these two are saying, like writers are passionate about specific subjects, but because of the sheer scope of what just Unreal Engine is, and then add to that Fortnite Creative, UEFN, Verse, compliance, developer services, there's also the element that we all have to be able to kind of cross-pollinate. And just even still sticking within Unreal Engine, we don't actually have embedded writers with the teams. What we do have is that writers are points of contact. So Jessica is point of contact for PCG, Mike is point of contact for various programmer writing sessions. I'm point of contact for virtual production, but I don't actually do any writing for them. So we have to also be able to assign work across the team. Why is the music still there?
It's supposed to be. Don't worry.
Okay. Okay. Why am I only hearing it now? I don't know. Anyway, we have to be able to assign work across the team, right? So Jessica gets to do like PCG first and foremost, but yes, doggo. But we also have to be able to assign some of what would be her pages to other writers, or to assign Jessica to do other stuff. Like, so because of priorities, I have to be able to tell Jessica, drop PCG stuff for now, you're working on this thing because of reasons that we can't say on the live stream. So what I am bringing in as an example, I want to bring both DMX and virtual camera. I can't actually read what is on the screen because of reasons. So could you just tell me, this is DMX, I see DMX. Okay, so we're currently in the 5.3 documentation for DMX. And this is an example of what we were saying before with regards to sometimes you just have to nuke it and start over. So if our glorious goblin in the background would actually please go in and show the 5.0 version. what you should be able to see in the left-hand side is that that table of content that you're seeing there is completely different to the one you saw in 5.3. And what we did, yes, thank you for doing the little circle. What we did there is I collaborated with the product manager for the DMX section, and we sat down a full year ago and said, how do we catch up with the technical debt? Because we hadn't been able to do extensive updates to the DMX section since 4.2.7. 4.2.7 is an entire major release ago. So 5.0, 5.1, we hadn't been able to update. So it was so vastly out of date. So we sat down and went, how do we build a documentation plan? And how do we future-proof it so we don't put ourselves in the same kind of situation where we won't be able to update as new additions to the feature, to the functionality comes out. So we actually created that new docs plan, and if our lovely goblin would go back to the 5.3 version, also a big shout out to our version picker. It's really good. As you can see, it's a smaller table of content right now, but all of those pages are actually reflecting, apart from the overview, which gives you the conceptual, what even is this? What do you use it for? Why should you care? The subsequent pages actually point to individual functionality that is within the DMX system. So you have the control section, you have the library section, and so on, library and patching. Which enable us to, in the future, whenever there's a change to the control setting, we only have to update that one page, right? We don't have to do the entire analysis of which other pages and so on, because that is the page that covers that. Now, I did that documentation plan, but I don't have time to write anymore because I manage a whole bunch of amazing people that I have duty of care for. I talk to a lot of various different stakeholders. I talk to these product managers and so on. So my contribution to actual writing is that I do a lot of those editorial reviews that we talked about before. So that meant that I could do the documentation plan, but I couldn't do the writing. So there are actually currently 3 different writers that have contributed to that minimized table of content that you're seeing now, because I have then had to write my JIRA tickets like I wasn't going to be the one reading them, and actually give a full overview of what is the plan here. And then I had to source input for each of the new pages as we intended for them to be, both from the product manager, but also from the QA analyst, who is the actual real subject matter expert in all of these features, and have them write out as much pre-doc as possible. As Mike said before, it can take very many different shapes and forms. If you are really adept with the functionality that you're writing about, maybe it's an interview or resume, maybe it's enough to just get the bullet points and get you started, because tech writers actually test the content as well as they go along. But with this one, because it had to be outsourced or assigned to various different writers, we were really dependent on the actual team providing most of it for us, and then coming back to them and iterate on it and so on. So that's one element that I wanted to show of this. We nuked it. We nuked it and went, how do we start from scratch, and how do we prevent ourselves from coming into that situation again? So there are certain pages that aren't actually there yet, but that's part of the plan, that 4.5.4, we're going to update what needs updating there, and then we're going to add the pages that we can. And then 4.5.5, we're going to do the same thing. So that by the time we get to version, we will now have a table of content for this specific area that is evergreen, future-proofed, and easy for us to update as we go along. So full stopping on that. And then if our glorious abysmal creature in the background could go to the other section, which is the virtual camera actor that I linked you to. Fantastic. So this one is virtual camera. It relates to the scene camera. So it's, you use the camera in order to create your clips and so on, and then use it in sequencer. And the scene camera can use a lot of rigging, which is very rigid. That's a little word pun. But the virtual camera lets you actually animate those scene cameras and kind of navigate them via various different controls. So the reason I'm using or highlighting this as an example is that this is an example of both what Jessica has done with regards to doing a feature that is still under development because the virtual camera still is, but also kind of what Mike was displaying with regards to updating the quality of the content that already exists. We're quite proud of this actor guide as it is right now. That took substantial work from one of our senior writers. But if you go to the 5.0 version, I'm not lagging. Ooh, doesn't exist. If you go to the 5.1 version,
there is no 5.1 version.
Well, now you're switching to the 5.1 version of a 404 arrow. So
yeah, if you just go back twice, go back twice, and then go to the 5.1 version. No, the demo gods are against us.
This is what I'm talking. This is what I was talking about with the links. Yep. This is why you have to go and manually fix them.
Yep, so great. That's a thing that happened. So I can't actually use that as an example. But then I can just talk about it while our little goblin scrolls and you forget what you just saw. But actually, exactly what Mike is saying, this is exactly an example of, we missed a thing in the background because it's really extensive work.
Look into the light.
I'm so sorry. But what I wanted to articulate with this was that for 5.0 there was like not even a minimal viable product. It was like scraped of like we just need some content out there, right? And then for 5.1 we achieved what we would call a minimal viable product. I'm the one who pushed that out, and I can tell you like I was not proud of it. It was just like it technically has the information. It technically lives up to an amount of the best practices. I'm not proud of it. And that was what we just like, that's what we have time for. And then for 5.2, we added some more stuff and so on, and it became a little more extensive. We also had a brief situation where for about 2 days, we accidentally rendered the 5.1 version in the 5.2 live site. So that was not very good because it was actually one of our product specialists who works with this kind of thing in a stage environment, in actual productions, helping actual Hollywood studios use this kind of thing, that pointed out like, you guys. So that was one of the things where we had to rapidly fix it and then republish it in the correct version. Oops. And I'm gonna full stop myself and then like getting back up to my training thought. Buffering lag. It's coming up on 10 p.m. my time, so I think I'm excused. But anyway, moving from like scraped version to minimal viable product, and then moving over to this thing, which is actually really extensive. It will answer your questions before they arrive. The actual walkthrough, like the annotation on the I think that one is a little like scrollable and so on. So it'll show you the various different, like, it will not just be a picture, but it'll show you like what the thing actually does. The annotation with regards to like highlighting various different areas and so on, just the descriptions and so on. We're really proud of this one now. And that's an example of like, we iterated on the quality of the page itself while also iterating on updating the content for new features. But also, this was also done by various different writers. Like the person who did the 5.0 stuff is not even in the team anymore. I did the 5.1 stuff. Actually, someone else did started doing the 5.1 stuff, but then it became so extensive because of reasons similar to what Mike expressed before, that it kind of came back to me at the time, because it would like, this other person is the point of contact for an entirely different area and should actually spend their time over there, which is also a priority. So then I had to take over and do it, which gladly. And then for 5.2, I don't even remember who in our team like took the 5.2 one, but someone did, and that's great. And then for 5.3, it was put with a completely different person who is a senior writer that does a lot of the rendering stuff and has done like a ton of stuff all over the place, and who we rely on for what we call mercenary work, which is like whenever we need something like this as a one-off, he's one of the people that we send into that situation. So he's the one who did this final iteration on it, where it got to the point where we are now as a team proud of this page. So that was also just to use an example of exactly that, like all of the things that we're saying in various different real life examples, like as we would say in Danish, like they go up like to a higher level of unity.
I like that.
Yeah. There's no cow on the ice.
Yeah. There are no cows on the ice. This is true.
Yeah.
May
Oh
I
my
add
God.
something?
Of course.
Always.
So, yeah, Kat kind of touched on like the opposite of what I was talking about. There's a thing where you know, don't know who the original developer was who was responsible for building a feature. And then you kind of look around for whoever is the next best thing, right? Whoever is working with a lot or whoever is maintaining it right now or what have you. But then there's always the situation where you get a section and you don't know who originally wrote the section. Or sometimes, you know, it's many generations of ghosts of technical writers past who were responsible for a section. I feel like the programming and scripting section in particular has a lot of that, where a lot of different people came in at different times with ideas of how they wanted to revise this section or new pages they wanted to write. And sometimes they're repeating older work that was already done, but that they, you know, for whatever reason, they decided wasn't up to their standard. Sometimes it's stuff that could be interlinked, but it isn't because two different people wrote it. And you just run into all kinds of problems with that, and that drives a lot of the reorgs that I've done over the years.
Yeah.
Nobody's fault, but it's gotta get dealt with.
There's also an extra element which, you know, is potentially faux pas to mention, but this is relevant to all kinds of situations where really intelligent and passionate people work together, which is the third option when you know exactly who wrote the page and you want to make substantial changes and we get pressures about it. So how does the person who redid this iteration, who reports to me, tell me that they think that some of what I wrote is subpar and they want to make changes? Kindly and directly is the answer. But there are situations where, you know, we have to also navigate the fact that we're all working on stuff together and we all have a really collaborative mindset, but every once in a while, like, ego gets involved as well, as it does in any situation. So as I said before, technical writing is diplomacy. We drink our coffee and we love our job.
It is good to check. It is good to check with the previous owner too, in those, if you have the option, because sometimes they've made like a writing decision that isn't normally in line with styles and standards, or that might seem unusual, and then you come to find out that's because a lot of people asked support questions about this particular thing, and so inserting this was a great way to address it. So you want to keep it, please. Thank you.
Exactly. And sometimes you're also noticing when you're doing all of that regression analysis and you want to make a change to a page, you might also like want to double check because it might be part of someone else's documentation plan that they are going to make changes to it. And not necessarily, you might be doing different stuff and both of your changes are valid, but if the other person is going to change the placement of it, that will affect other stuff and so on. So you have to constantly know what is in flight in the back end in order to not cause 404s.
We get merge conflicts too.
Again, no big deal.
No big deal.
Working in technical documentation is not unlike working in development. There's a lot of the same issues.
Yeah, definitely. And I commend you all for being able to get through it to, you know, what we have now. I mean, it's insane. So is there, first, I don't want to interrupt you, Kat, so if there are other examples that you want to
I'm
get
done.
through.
Full stopped.
Awesome. Then if y'all are up for it, I have a couple of questions that I've pulled from chat here. Also, chat, if you have questions that you haven't asked yet, now is the time to do so. Make sure you throw those in there real quick so we can go through rapid fire, answer some questions for you. But yeah, if y'all are up for it, I have a couple prepped and ready.
Bring it on.
All right, let's do this. So the first question is, this is leaning a little bit more towards what you were talking about, Mike, but is definitely still applicable for all three of you. But while updating underdocumented or much older systems, do you ever talk with the engineers about adding comments in the code to explain it if there are no comments in areas like that?
I'll go first on this one because I think it's going to echo what Mike is also going to say. Absolutely. For me, I don't often look as much in the code as Mike does, but my biggest pet peeve is tooltips that don't exist. Just like you guys, I am a user of the engine, and I love to be able to highlight something and get some quick information. Tooltips are also an integral part sometimes of learning the system so that we can document them. The downside of that is when something doesn't have a tooltip, it is annoying. But the devs also have limited time, same as the rest of us. We have tight deadlines so that we can get releases out in a timely manner for everyone. And, the important thing to remember is everyone does the best they can. But yeah, when working with something that is underdocumented or not documented enough, things do come up, and we do get that information back to the devs. In the end, we are trying to address all your questions before you have them. And tooltips and code comments go a long way to addressing it.
Definitely. Did you have anything you wanted to add on to that as well, Mike?
I feel like Jessica addressed that quite well. There are lots of instances where denser code commenting would be very beneficial to the documentation. Kat, can I mention the A word?
You can mention the A word.
The API docs. We have an API docs section where you can look up by fully qualified name all the classes, functions, properties in Unreal Engine source code, or ideally all of them. Those are generated from code comments. So if you see a class that doesn't have like a description for what it is, or a function that doesn't have a description for what it does in the API docs, that's because there is not a code comment for it. That's been a problem that we've been trying to address for quite some time, up to and including talking to the developers and saying, hey, could we expand the code commenting a little bit? But new developers come in and all the time. Epic has grown immensely in the last 5 years, since I've been here. And before that, it grew immensely then as well. I think I got here at around like 1,000-ish people, maybe between 1,000 and 1,500. Some of the earliest members of the docs team were here when it was more like 300 or so. More people come in, they get put onto hot projects. They've got to turn things around quickly. They can't always stop to do the code commenting. And then there's a lot of situations where it's a feature that changes so rapidly, it's a lot of time to spend. We're still working on it. We're still working on a solution that will be equitable for everybody involved, but it's a very complicated problem with wide-reaching scale. So it's not easy to get that kind of thing, the momentum for that kind of thing.
Programmers in chat, this is why you should always comment your code. I don't know if you were taught that in school, but I always make my students do it. Always comment your code, because you never know what those comments are used for.
It's very frequently used in API documentation across the software industry, in fact.
Yeah.
It's very typical.
So I'm going to come from a completely different angle as well, and I'm going to use my manager voice because this is something that the community also needs to know, because it's a very, very good question. Do you also help on those things? And the answer immediately is yes, because the writers are passionate about what they do. They also want to maintain good working relationships with the teams that they are point of contact for, and by default, the primary writers for, like caveating all of what I said before with regards to cross assignment and so on and so forth. I want to also keep a good working relationship with the team that I used to write for and I'm still point of contact for, and so on. Manager voice is at capacity And sometimes these people actually have to sneak it in between what they are actually assigned to work on. And then I kindly nudge them with a sledgehammer, as my team has a tendency to say, because it's a fine balance, right? Like, because it's technically not documentation. And so I have to assign various different things to these people. I have to sign off on their deliverables. I'm also the person that has to mitigate, because as you can all, I mean, I don't barely even have to say this. You can see this in the documentation suite. We cannot keep up with the production of new features. So we have to prioritize, like which are most important to the community, which are most important to current company priorities. You can bet that when we did Lego, when that came out, there was a lot of stuff that had happened like in the background where that had been the priority for us. So we want to be able to help on all different kinds of areas, but the writers are also kind of restricted by the fact that there are things that come down from the top, there are things that come in from the sideline, and they have strict managers who like look at them and go like, okay, maybe do it, but not take too much time on it because you actually have to do this thing over here. And I like the reason I'm saying that expressly is I also want the community to know this, right? Like the writers are passionate. They want to do all of the things. They do not have the time, and sometimes they don't have the permission. Oh,
Cat's
the
talking
faces
about
you
me.
both just made. Oh.
Yeah, Cat's talking about me.
Lovingly.
I've had the talk from time to time about doing overtime too much now and again. And yeah, there was one incident in particular where I had a documentation plan for a section that shall remain nameless as of right now because it's not necessarily something I can openly talk about. I think that after I crunched the numbers, it was something like 2.5 years worth of work at our normal, estimated pace for completing a new doc. And I crunched the numbers on, well, what if I worked 12 hours a day every day and it still wouldn't have gotten completed within like the year? So there is a definite sense of having to pick your battles and figure out what are the milestones that you want to hit, when do you want to hit them, what's the acceptable shape that you can be in by the time you reach this milestone or this release or whatever you're using as a milestone.
Yep. And sorry, do you want to
Please.
go first? Yeah. Okay. Politeness. So all of what Mike was just saying, right? And I also want to make clear, like, there is no, I mentioned the phrase duty of care before, right? Like, so I think it's become blatantly obvious through these examples of how much goes into this. The risk of burnout is really big. And as I've constantly said, these are highly intelligent people that are incredibly passionate. There's always a lot of stuff to do. So when I say every once in a while, we managers go in and block and go, no, Jessica, you can't do that. It's not because we are being obstinate. It's not because we don't want to help. It's not because we don't care about the community and that element of the docs. But there's also an element of like, we as people and we as a team can only do so much. And so we have to do exactly what Mike is saying of like prioritizing what is the acceptable and sustainable level that we can achieve within this time frame, where we both are presenting a good product to our users, but also are not like burning out our people doing so. I know that's one of the things that you're technically not supposed to say within the industry, but we all know it's a thing.
It's real.
It's real.
I feel like we went on a little bit of a tangent from the code comments thing.
It was an important,
sorry, like
important tangent, though.
The short answer to your question from chat is yes, sometimes.
Great. Okay, next question. No, those were all, that was a fantastic train of thought, and I think also an important conversation piece for people to have visibility on, honestly. The next question I have is from I haven't always been saying their names, but this one's fun, so I'm gonna give it a go. Lampipedura. I think I said it right. But they're wondering, when using Unreal 5.1, should I only use 5.1 documentation, or are there subjects that need to be where you need to use the newer documentation versions for better optimization or things like that?
Oh boy. Mike, your face.
Mike, you wanna take this one, and then I will
this
add
is
my
a cosmic
opinion.
horror type of question, actually.
Oh my god.
That has haunted my nightmares.
This is how you see several technical writers burn down in front of you. Like,
so okay. Ideally, in a section that has been maintained to the best of our ability, you will definitely benefit from using the 5.1 documentation over later versions of the documentation, because the later versions might have changed the workflow in some way. There might be features that got added. Like, you don't want to use the MVVM guide. MVVM. That's the acronym for view models. You don't want to use the view model guide from 5.3 for like an earlier version of UE when it didn't have the blueprint support, for instance. That wouldn't help you. At the same time, there are limits to how far back we can go to fix everything when we find bugs, or when we, add documentation for underdocumented areas, or fill in gaps. Can I
clarify that just really specifically? Because we have a hard rule set for this. So what we're updating is current version, last version, future version. So right now, 5.3 is out. So we backport updates down to 5.2 and into 5.4, right? Because we're constantly writing into the next version while constantly also doing upkeep and updates and technical debt for the current version. And then if some of those are relevant to the last version, we do that as well. Now we have a rule set for one-offs. I'm going to do my first swear, and I'm really proud that we took it 2 hours in, because it's literally a thing I asked Tina before we started, and I asked, like, can I cuss during this? And Tina said, not during the first 10 minutes. And I made it like 2 hours. So clap. But anyway, we have an internal phrase called shit happens, right? Because shit happens. And so we have a rule set for being able to backport to previous versions that go further back than the last version. But it's only if it's a shit happens situation, if there is a licensee that is dependent on it, if there is, if it affects something special project. But if it doesn't, any of those, like if it doesn't cover any of those things or live in any of those categories, generally we say no, because we're only focusing on current version, last version, future version.
And there are so many things I want to fix.
I wonder what it says about me that I keep having those docs, Kat. There are, typically the most recent 2 versions that are available to you are going to be the most up-to-date versions of the documentation, just because of the human limit of dealing with a growing number of different versions. Like, you think about it, when 5.1 was around, we had 4.26, 4.27, 5.0, 5.0 early access as well, and then 5.1. That's 5 different versions of the doc space. Add 5.2, 5.3, and now upcoming 5.4, and that's how many versions of the docs we would have to backport everything to.
We had to draw the line.
Yeah. There are times when we do that because it is something that is very important. For instance, Android SDK setup. There was a change from Google on the Android Studio side of things that essentially meant that the script we were using to automate a lot of the setup process had broken, and I had to add in a step to every prior version from 5.1 backwards, telling people, here's what you have to do in order to unbreak the Android SDK setup, because We can't go back and patch those versions of Unreal Engine now. So this is just what has to happen. It was unforeseeable. We're sorry about it, and here it is.
I had to do it like a year ago because NVIDIA changed the way they presented the locales in their URLs on their standard website. So that instead of having like the locale is where it says EN_US or like DA_DK, right? Like, so it's the localization locale, which incidentally is one of the things we also have to be concerned about when we talk about bringing localization into the conversation as well. So NVIDIA decided, like, I would say somewhat randomly, to change the location of it in their URL. So every single time we were referring to NVIDIA, the page would be broken. And it would look like we just didn't know how to add a URL, right? So we actually had to go in and find every single manual reference to it all the way back through the docs as well, and do that as a single update because, you know, graphics cards, pretty important. So yeah, we have situations like that where it's not necessarily that shit happened internally, but someone caught the fact that an external factor that we have to link to because of reasons has completely changed. And so that would be one of the examples for going back to that.
And I would also like to point out as well that sometimes those things cannot be automated. Sometimes the change cannot be done with a script. And just go, oh, you know, scan 4,000 pages of documentation and change it where it needs to be changed. We run into a lot of problems where it actually requires, as one of our coworkers puts it, Mark 1 eyeballs.
Yeah. And then also, two things to add to this entire context, right? Is do we then decide to like say Unreal Engine is localized into Korean, Japanese, and Chinese, right? Do we then have the localization team do that change when it's just a URL? Or do I go in and find the URL in all of the files for all 4 languages in all of the instances that we have manually found with our eyeballs and make those changes myself? And do I then also make the merge request for all of them? So that's an interesting hiccup. Now, adding to a complete or a complete extra thing is when we say Unreal Engine, we actually also mean MetaHuman and Twinmotion, because they are, you know, not part of Unreal Engine themselves, but they are part of the ecosystem of Unreal Engine. They're also versioned differently than Unreal Engine is. So Twinmotion follows like a 2023 version, and there was a 2022 version, and I don't even actually off the top of my head remember the versioning for MetaHuman. So to the original question that you brought up of like, which version of the documentation should I be using if I'm using 5.1? Well, if you want to be sure that it's technically accurate for 5.1, use 5.1. Because we have the version picker, you can check the later versions of the pages so that for virtual camera, for example, you'd probably learn more about it using you'd learn more about it for 5.3. But for the descriptions of the UI that you are seeing in 5.1, use the 5.1 because that is what is describing everything that was in there at that time.
That's really well said, Kat. I really like that summation.
Thank you.
You have said what I was struggling to say.
I would also, at this point, put on my teacher hat because I never stop being a teacher. Start with the version that you are using, and if you can't find that version, go to 5.2, go to 5.3.
Yeah,
you'll find the information, and that's true for just about any of the features.
Yeah, awesome.
Full stop, I think.
Yeah, I have one final question for you, just because I've already kept you here for so long, and I think this is an interesting one to potentially end on as well. But this is from the main Stark, and they're wondering, what is the main thought process to kind of get into when trying to simplify extremely technical documentation down for a wide variety of users?
Ooh,
I love that question.
That is such a great question. If you don't mind, I'd like to go first on this one.
Do it.
Because it is something actually I learned. I have a degree in game development, but I also have I have a master's degree in education. And it's something, differentiating instruction is what we call it, where you have to teach for, the entire width and breadth of experience in your classroom. It's the same thing here. Our documentation, the user, quote unquote, is from the very first person who is installing it and for the first time and saying, I want to make my dream game, all the way up to even our own internal developers use our documentation to figure stuff out. So that is a huge range of experience. And each of our writers has their sort of own experience. We've talked a few times about where all of our backgrounds are. Mine's in teaching with high school kids. Mike was a developer. Kat is a
career technical writer.
Career technical writer. Thank you. Those words were in there. I was just trying to find them.
Lag.
Exactly. It is a professional career technical writer, and we all bring these different backgrounds to our experiences writing the documentation for all of you. So a lot of the documentation that I write is specifically targeted at new users. I have decided that I'm going to champion the new user, the hobby user, and because I was a teacher, students and the teacher that, oh my God, just found out they're going to teach Unreal next year at their high school. Oh, doggy cam.
It's too dark. That was real professional of me, by the way.
But not the cats.
And yes, as someone just pointed out, even the boomer user. It's such a large width and breadth that's why we have a style guide. We want to make reference information available for the user that is very technically proficient. We want to make tutorials available for the beginner and the intermediate user that are trying to find something specific. And we always want to have the new user experience in mind for the user that is just like, oh my God, what are all these buttons on this screen? What do? I just want to make a RPG adventure game. So to bring it back to the question that was asked, there is not really a focus on tutorial style types of things. As Kat has mentioned, we need to make sure that there is referential information. We need to make sure that there is tutorials and process type information. We need to make sure it's all there, which is what makes our job so busy all the time.
Can I come at the question from a different angle?
Absolutely.
After you do it, I'm going to do it too.
Ooh. So the question was, what is the train of thought that goes when you have to disseminate such vast and technical knowledge into what we're delivering, right? And one of the things that I've done throughout my career since my first job, I think this is my 5th or 6th job as a technical writer. And one of the things that I like a little format for actually asking questions that I created in my first job, I've brought with me throughout my various jobs. And it's even in our Confluence page. We have a page called What Even is Predoc? And it has a series of questions. And all of the questions start with a W because it is why? Why does this feature exist? Who? Who does it exist for? Where? Where in the UI is it placed? What is the technicality? Then there's the one question that doesn't start with a W, which is how? How do I actually use it? And then I also have a question which always kind of irks people a little bit, but is actually where I get my primary knowledge, which is why should I care? Because it's not just like who uses it and so on, but like, why does that particular user who is an animator, why do we care about this particular one? Which, as I said before, with regards to the media plate actor, like, why do I need to care about that? Like, well, one, it's a simplified workflow, but some people like doing it manually because they trust that more and so on and so forth. But like, the reason you should really care is because it does this thing where it only renders what is visible to the frustum, which means that your budget, like it's a lot easier on that. And so that is part of my thought process that I bring into every development team I've ever worked with, whether it be the graphics team I work with at Unity, whether it be the VP team that I've worked with here. And also, as I said before, I've also documented something as interesting as an email marketing management system in a content management system. And for all of them, those are the questions I ask. So I have like my subject matter experts, sometimes multiple subject matter experts on the same product or the same feature answer these questions because they'll have various different entry points to it. And then that will help me get to where Jessica is with regards to, well, what do I need to deliver then? What are the things that these people need to know? Because a developer will give me a different where and a different how and a different why than the product manager will, than the QA person will.
Right.
So I want to weigh in on this from the standpoint of a project that I've got underway right now. I'm working with a unique set of platform docs. I'm not sure how at liberty I am to say what type of platform or what type of industry it is, but yeah, it's the thing that I can say is that when it comes down to it, a lot of the stuff that they need to do, okay, I can say that this subset of users doesn't traditionally work on game development and doesn't traditionally work with game development software. So there's a lot of conventions you can take for granted that a lot of other users come into the site would know about, but you can't take for granted that this other set of users knows about it. So that makes information difficult for them to find. They don't necessarily have a conceptual map of the systems in Unreal Engine that map to the tasks that they have to do. So I'm writing that. I'm writing a literal map, a page that is like a hub pointing this set of users at different parts of the docs that already cover the things that they need to do. Particularly certain optimization oriented documentation. Because a lot of that stuff does exist. A lot of the stuff that they are asking about is there. They just don't necessarily know where to look for it or why they, in particular, need it. And that's a useful, way of constructing these docs in your head when you're thinking about game developers too, because I think about students a lot. A student coming to the site does not know what serialization means. They don't know, in computer science, unless they've been studying computer science, they don't know what that means. It means saving data, So I need to sit down and say, all right, save games. This is how you do them. Go to the stuff about serialization. Go to the stuff about saving properties. That's what you need. Building a main menu. Go to the scene loading stuff, the level loading stuff for transitioning to your actual gameplay. Go to why am I blanking on this? It's the cinematic. It's the sequencer.
Because how many features do you work on?
Yeah, you go to sequencer for doing cinematics if you need to like pan in and out on some cool stuff while your menu is displayed. You go to UMG to do the basics of the menu and so on and so forth. There's ways that you can break this down in a way that is not necessarily super specific in terms of like a dead step-by-step walkthrough of exactly what they need to do, because everybody is doing something different. That's one thing that I've learned from years of working in video games is that two different video games will share very little in common about the way that their code works, about the way their assets are organized, about the way they load things. So you need to kind of generalize and point them in the right direction, give them a map and a compass instead of a dotted line. Kat, what are you?
Total addition to what you're saying, because no, you cannot disclose that platform. But we can disclose quite a similar situation, which I've mentioned several times, which is virtual production. So one of the things that Mike is kind of touching upon is that we do have some verticals that, like, we're focusing a lot on gaming. A lot of people, you know, the majority of people that are interested in this live stream, for example, have to do with game development. But Unreal Engine is used for other things, including platforms which Mike cannot disclose, and virtual production that we do know is used. Now, common to these, as Mike said, is that these people are not game developers. However, they are highly intelligent and highly specialized and experienced in the thing that they do. So here's a completely different element to it, because as I said before, and Jessica underlined as well, you don't read the docs because you want to. You read it when you're already frustrated. Now, imagine the level of frustration of someone who is really good at what they do, having to work in a product that they are not used to working in, and suddenly going into a situation where they feel incompetent. And then that is going to cause extra frustration. So now imagine having to write to those people, because it is a completely different situation than writing to the budding game developer, right? So as Mike said, I think of students, but here you have to, like, it's akin to when, like, a senior software developer has to take new classes in order to achieve further, like, certification, right? It's much more like you're talking to someone who's already an expert in something. So you have to not, like, you have to find the balance between not being demeaning towards them. That's not the word. Someone help me. But you have to not talk down to them. You have to
You don't want to
speak to
patronize them.
you don't want to patronize them.
Yes,
That's the
that's
exact
the
thing. You
one.
don't want to patronize them while also not taking their knowledge for granted, because you can't. And then also, like, various different factors of, like, speaking to that individual. You also have to remove yourself from the mindset that you're in. Like, Mike's background is game development. So he comes to these platforms with the aspect of how would I use these in games development? But he has to then make himself aware of what the needs are for the people using this platform and what they would expect to see in the products that they would usually use or that they use tangentially, and then be able to map those. And, like, a really simple example of that is actually, I'm sorry for keep going back to Unity, but there is this constant meme that, like, when Tim Sweeney created Unreal, he kind of mapped it in the reverse with regards to what Unity was doing with regards to something. So if you don't know that coming to, like, from one platform to the other, you're gonna be bungled every single time. So it just exists, and Tim, like, shares it frequently on Twitter himself.
Oh, it's the coordinates.
Yeah, exactly. That thing. Thank you. And
D
so
is up. Yeah.
V up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so, like, using virtual production as an example, because that is something we can actually talk to specifically instead of in generic terms in order to not break our NDA. One of the first things one of our product specialists told me when I took over as a writer for that area when I joined is these people are highly specialized and experienced people that work in Hollywood. These are people that operate cameras. These are people that are producers there. These are people that are used to doing cinematography in, like, old school style, or they're used to doing green screen filming. And if something breaks within the virtual production setup, they do not have time. They are frantically on their phone or their tablet scrolling through the documentation while Selma Hayek is standing over in a corner, and every minute costs them thousands of dollars. And so having to write for these people is vastly different as well. And that is something that our writers have to do as well, because, like, the people that are using MetaHuman might, like, not necessarily know how to then animate them within Unreal Engine. The camera people that are using, like, that are filming with physical cameras might not know how to use the vertical cam or the virtual camera, but the people that are game developers will know how to use it, like, because it's such a part of just using cameras and camera stacking. And so that's something we also constantly have to be mindful of, that we have to change our way of communicating according to the needs, both, as Jessica said, with regards to the reader can be the same person, but as they journey through their competence level and their needs level for the docs, but also we're also sometimes writing to audiences that don't have the same, we can't assume the same level of knowledge, and we can't assume the same not interest area, but like we can't assume that what we're used to explaining is actually what they're there for, and we have to anticipate those different needs.
Yeah.
Which is
So no
why we
biggie.
can't write just one guide that does everything.
Yeah.
Because everybody is approaching it with a different use case.
Yep.
You know, the best practice guide for PCG would be different for someone doing it for games versus someone doing it for movies versus someone who was doing it for insert subject there.
Yeah. So no biggie.
Yeah, we just
Wizards.
covered a few things.
Wizard unicorns.
Wizard
Yeah,
unicorns.
If you have technical writers in your own company, I love and adore them. Give them cookies, bring them a cup of coffee so they will love their job. If you do not have technical writers in your company, why not? Like, get it done, sort it.
There you go. Just do it.
I like the term documentation cleric.
I like
I
the
like
term
that too.
badass miracle
I do.
worker.
I'm one of the few people who likes doing healing and support.
I prefer crafter of artisanal text.
Oh. That's
Can you
that's a
tell that
tough
we're
one. That's
white
some good
people?
marketing there. That
Just
makes
getting
me feel like I'm
progressive
gonna have homebrewed coffee and a croissant.
God, I would love a homebrew coffee and a croissant right now.
Okay, wait, we've derailed, guys. Like, Tina, wrangle us back.
All right. So bring it all back. I think we'll end up, I think that's a great place to end today's session actually. But for anyone who is watching who might have more questions about technical writing or anything like that, is there any way for them to get suggestions to you, to reach out to the team? What's the best way for people to go about that?
So to reach out to me personally, you can reach out to my handle on Twitter. I love answering questions about game development and all the good stuff. Yes, everything down in our lower thirds right there. But also, if you have a specific need regarding the documentation, I believe we still have a section of the forums for that. If I'm not right, please correct me. You can mention in the forums that something needs to be expanded on or corrected. We do look at those, so please be polite about it. If you really want us to do something, just don't tell us to do it. Just ask, please. And we're happy to take a look at that. You know, it may be, as we've mentioned throughout the entire last couple hours, it may be a while before we get to it, but we have seen it and we will get to it.
Awesome. Yes, please be nice to our documentation team. They're working hard, they're doing their best, and they're doing wonderful things with not a lot of hands. So they'll get to it. Swearsies. But yeah, with that, thank you so much, all of you, for coming on to the show today. Really appreciate you taking the time to be here and to talk about this with us and to kind of walk through the process and your thought processes as well for doing this. Really, really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for giving us the space to nerd out about it.
Of course. This is the best place to do it.
Yeah.
And then also, of course, thank you everyone who came and watched the show. It wouldn't be what it is without you and your interaction, especially for our Q&A sections. Really appreciate you bringing in your questions and your energy and being part of this conversation and being here. If any of you popped into the conversation halfway through or later, no worries. We post all of our streams in video format that can be viewed on demand on both our Twitch and YouTube channel. So you can always come back to this to rewatch a part or watch a part that you may have missed if you came in a little bit later, or just watch the whole thing again later. I won't say no. You're allowed to. It's the internet. Do what you want. But with that, one last big thank you around to everyone. If you want to keep up with the latest news, you can do so at Unreal Engine on all of our socials, as well as come say hi in our forums, where you can get the latest tutorials, news, as well as speak to other community members. I mean, you can talk to the other community managers, but community members get answers to your questions, all that good stuff. So thank you for being here, and we'll see y'all next time. Bye, everyone.